Hello and welcome to this video. Today we're going over the best and worst books that I read in 2022. If I'm a little off-center in this camera, it's because I'm sharing my chair with a cat. He does not want to get up, so I'm just kind of like squished in here and trying not to squish him too much. So I think let's start with the worst books that I read so we can end on a positive note. I'm just gonna kind of go through my Goodreads list. Because let's be real, I don't necessarily remember every single thing that I read. I also will say there are some series that I read, like Outlander, where I really do enjoy the books, but it's hard for me to say like this one particular book I loved above the others, because I don't know, with series I feel like I just kind of see them as a whole. So as a whole, I really enjoyed Outlander. I feel like I did decently this year. Like, I read a decent amount of books that I liked. I didn't read a lot of things that I hated. Okay, so the first book that I did not really vibe with this year is Comfort Me with Apples. It's a really short kind of horror book, and I don't want to say too much because I feel like it was so short that it's easy to ruin, but basically it's like a Garden of Eden situation. All of the couples have like animal names, and you have your main character who is obviously like your Eve, but she starts discovering like body parts around her house, and there seems to be some sort of mystery going on with her husband, and I don't want to say much more than that because it gives away what happens if you want to read it. But I feel like if you're someone who grew up Christian and like knows the story of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and stuff like that, it's just something that I've heard so many times that it didn't feel original. Even though I can't say like this idea was kind of original, it's just, I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. I didn't vibe with it, but I can see how other people might like it. The next book, which I feel like again sort of falls into the it's in a series thing. Ironically, well, not ironically, I don't have a lot of the books that are in like the series that I didn't like. But maybe I'll try to like put a picture up. So I did not like Aragon. I didn't read Aragon this year, but I read Brissinger and Inheritance because I wanted to at least finish the series and see if it would get any better. I remember it was either middle school or high school when these books were coming out, and they were like all the craze, but I wasn't allowed to read books about dragons. So I'm an adult now, and I was like, well, I never read them to begin with, so I should read them now and see what all the hype was about. And I do not understand the hype. I did not like these books. I feel like maybe if you've never read fantasy before, they would be interesting, and I think the basis at its core is interesting. It's just so slow that to me it felt really boring. I'm sorry if you loved these books growing up. I did not, and maybe if I read them when I was younger, I would have had more patience and enjoyed it more. It just felt like hardly anything happened considering how big those books were. I feel like you could have cut the books in half and just crammed all the actual action in, and it would have been a lot better. And I have one other friend who has the same opinion, but I know a lot of my friends really enjoyed it. So I'm sorry, I did not. I DNF'd my first book ever this year. That book was called Race for the Mind, and I feel bad saying this because this book was written by someone who either still works for the company that I work at or used to work at the company, and he's like kind of high up, but it needed an editor. The basis of the book might have been okay. Like, it might have been a good book if it was written differently. I'm looking at Goodreads to remind myself what was supposed to happen in this book since I didn't finish it, but it's a story about the audacious challenge to defeat one of our greatest socioeconomic threats, Alzheimer's disease, and how the medical community and the pharmaceutical industry rise to face it. The pressure and enormous stakes of the race for the mind expose the most noble and misguided aspects of our humanity. So it goes over somebody who's like super smart, has a great brain, has done a lot of great work, and they get Alzheimer's. And then you see like the doctors and things that are trying to cure this Alzheimer's, and you see the pharmaceutical industry, which for those who don't know, I am in the pharmaceutical industry. And so I thought going in that it could be really interesting to maybe like see different sides of it than I see. But I could not get past the writing. indentation for paragraphs was really awkward. There were some points where you would have a conversation going, but it wouldn't indent for each like person talking. So you know how normally you have like person A and then, you know, person B starts on a new line and it's a new line every time. And there were a few cases where you would just have this long paragraph of multiple people talking in quotations, and it was really hard to follow. And then there were times where characters would address each other by their first names. And I know that that's like kind of normal to be like, oh, hi, John. But then you don't keep saying like, don't you think the weather's great, John? Would you like to go golfing next week, John? Like, you don't keep saying their name in conversation. It just feels really awkward. And that happened a few times. And then I felt like this person just had something against contractions. Like, you would get contractions every once in a while, but you would have so many things where they would say, what is wrong? Instead of what's wrong. And like, depending on your circumstances and who you're talking to, maybe you would have that more formal voice. But in a lot of these cases, it just felt awkward and weird. So I really did try it. I think I made it 40, 50 pages before I just gave up and could not read any further. And I have never DNF'd a book before, so you know it's bad if I'm DNFing. Oh, I almost forgot this one. The next book is How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. And I do have that somewhere. So I almost forgot about this one. This is How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. And this is something that I had on my like to read list for a hot minute. And my work does quarterly book clubs. They do quarterly book clubs or like TED Talk sort of situations, and you get together and discuss it. And this appeared and I was like, oh, I've been intending to read that anyway. Let me pick it up and read it for the book club. I don't like it. My main problem with this is that it says how to do nothing, but there's no how to in this book. She just says, you should do it. And then talks about bird watching a lot. If you want something that's actually going to tell you how to do it, don't read this book because it's not helpful. There might be some things in here, some stories or whatever that are kind of like, oh, I vibe with that. Maybe I like that, but it's not a helpful how to in any way whatsoever. I think they should have thought about the title better before calling it this. I think if you were going into it with different expectations, this book would maybe hold up better, but because I was expecting a how-to, like, I don't know, maybe set aside time to do nothing, set aside time to just go on walks or something. But she talks about like modern art and bird watching and stuff, and it just doesn't, like, there's no how-to. So I didn't understand it. Yeah, not my favorite book. Anyway, I think those are my least favorite books that I read this year looking at the list. I did not go through every single book and see how I rated it. A lot of books, sometimes I'll give like a 2.5 star or 3.5, and so I just round up on Goodreads. But looking at the list, those are the ones that stood out to me as ones that I didn't like, regardless of what I rated them on Goodreads. So now let's get into the books that I did enjoy, because that's a lot more fun to talk about. The first book is The Golden Enclaves. I know I said series are hard to talk about, but I read the other two books previous years. This book came out, I think, October of this year, and I just really enjoy it. If you like dark academia, you might want to consider checking this out. This last book is slightly less academic in that it doesn't take place in a school setting anymore. And I don't want to say a whole lot other than that because it is the third book in a series, so I can't say too much without spoiling anything. But the series as a whole almost feels to me like Harry Potter, but darker and more dangerous. They're basically in a school where they kind of teach themselves, and the school like gives them resources, but there's also monsters infiltrating the school and they have to try not to die before they graduate. So it's really interesting. Your main character is definitely very grumpy and kind of jaded, and she's prophesied to basically be this great destroyer of things, and she's trying not to be that, but she's also not trying to be friendly either. So I kind of like seeing a main character who's not like your normal main character, super happy, amazing. Definitely great dark academic vibes. Love this series. The next book is Where the Drowned Girls Go. Again, this is like multiple books into a series, so I don't really want to say a whole lot, but I really enjoy Shauna McGuire's writing. And that said, another book on my list is Middle Game. So this book came out this year. There's usually a new book, I think, around every January for the series, so I'll be picking that up soon for the next one. But it covers children that no longer feel like they belong in this world. And so they're going about their day and they find some sort of door that they go through. And it takes them to a world that is completely different from our own, but completely matches the desires and the needs of that child. So it might be like a world that's full of mermaids, or a world that's made of sugar and candy and cupcakes. So it's really interesting when you have those books that follow us into those worlds. And other books take place in this like home for these children where the parents have taken for them to rehabilitate, basically. Because when their children come back from these worlds, they sound a little crazy. You know, their parents think something's wrong with them, and so they check them into this like school, this home that's supposed to help rehabilitate them. And so this one takes place in the schools, and a new, really harsh, strict school is introduced, and it's really interesting to see that in this book. Middle Game is a book that's kind of hard for me to describe because it's just such an interesting thing. So I'm just going to read this to you. Meet Roger, skilled with words, languages come easily to him. He instinctively understands how the world works through the power of story. Meet Dodger, his twin. Numbers are her world, her obsession, her everything. All she understands, she does so through the power of math. Roger and Dodger aren't exactly human, though. They don't realize it. They aren't exactly gods either. Not entirely, not yet. Meet Reed, skilled in the alchemical arts like his progenitor before him. Reed created Dodger and her brother. He's not their father, not quite, but he has a plan. To raise the twins to the highest power, to ascend with them and claim their authority as his own. Godhood is attainable. Pray it isn't attained. It's something that's really hard to explain because you get introduced to this whole like world and this like magic that happens in here. There's a lot of alchemy, and it does give a slight dark academia vibe just because you have that alchemy. But basically these children discover that they have a link to each other, and they start talking to each other in their minds. They kind of see each other off and on. They eventually meet in person, and again, I can't say a whole lot without spoiling it, but it's really interesting if you're into like alchemy and things like that. And these children embody like language or embody math, and with that comes powers like being able to ask someone to do it and being super convincing without trying to be, things like that. And so it's really interesting the way that it was done. I really love the like magic alchemical system in here. Okay, the last book that I have is again part of a series, so I'm just gonna say that this whole series is like one of my favorites. So that is A Court of Thorns and Roses, and this is a book that I feel like has been talked about so many places, and I just keep seeing it and hearing about it, and so I finally picked it up, and I really enjoy it. I'm not gonna lie, I did see that my little sister read this on Goodreads, and I'm on the last book now, and it feels weird to me because like she's grown now, but there are some parts in there that's like, it's a little weird, but okay. I will say I enjoyed all of these, but my least favorite in the series is probably A Court of Frost and Starlight. It just gave me this like weird holiday book vibe, and for some reason I can't vibe with holiday books. Like it was okay, but it didn't really further the plot a whole lot. And then my first favorite is it's either A Court of Wings and Ruin or A Court of Mist and Fury. I'm not sure. I think A Court of Mist and Fury might be my favorite because you get in a lot of Rhysand and you start seeing that relationship build, and I really, really liked that. But yeah, this book was really good. It was definitely different than I was expecting. I've heard a lot of people say that it is like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and while that is true, I feel like that's only part of it. Like, the first, I don't know. Because you get a section of this where, this isn't a spoiler because it's in the synopsis, you have this human who's taken into this fairy world, this fae world, and she's with these people in this court, and they've basically been cursed to have to wear masks. And she finds out that she's supposed to like do something in order to save them, but she's already been sent to the human world, and she comes back, and then at that point it almost becomes more of like a game. She has to complete these trials in order to like free these people. And so to me it almost has like Harry Potter vibes. What's the one where they do the games? Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. It almost like sort of gives me that vibe, and that she's trying to like do these different trials, and that's maybe like the second half of the book. So it's really interesting. It wasn't what I was expecting. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I expected it to, because I've heard there's some smut, and there definitely is, but the last one, 100%, I think I'm like 70-80% of the way through the book, but 100% has a lot more smut than the rest of the books. So just to be warned, it's definitely open doors, so if that's not your thing, I do not recommend these books, but otherwise, I really enjoyed these. And that is it for this video. I've been talking for a hot minute now. Let me know what your favorite or least favorite books that you read this year are, so that I can either pick them up or maybe avoid them if they're that terrible. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!